For 5 months, Claire survived by being a ghost in the castle laundry, quietly mending the torn socks of strangers. Being invisible kept her safe, but her fragile peace shattered the evening. The heavy door creaked open, revealing 4 little boys with the Alpha King's piercing gray eyes. They hadn't come for patched clothes. Trembling, the smallest boy stepped forward, clutching a frayed scrap of his late mother's blanket with heartbreaking desperation. He whispered a secret request that would rewrite the fate of the cold northern kingdom forever. "Pretend you're our mother, just for a little while." The needle moved in a rhythm as old as hunger. Push, pull, knot, and on to the next torn heel. Claire sat on a low stool in the corner of the castle laundry, where the steam from the boiling vats curled against the stone ceiling and the smell of lye stung her nose. Around her lay a mountain of mending, shirts with torn seams, trousers with frayed cuffs, and a great pile of woolen socks worn thin by the boots of soldiers and servants alike. She had been at it since dawn, and the light from the high window had already begun to fade from gold to gray. She was good at this. It was the only thing she had ever been truly good at, taking something broken and making it whole again with a length of thread and patient fingers. Her mother had taught her years ago in another life, in a house with white curtains and a garden full of roses. That life was gone now, scattered like ashes in the wind, but the skill remained. It was the one thing no one had been able to take from her. "Claire? Claire, are you still here?" The voice belonged to Margaret, the castle's head cook, a broad-shouldered woman with flour permanently dusted across her apron and a scowl that never quite reached her warm brown eyes. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, shaking her head at the sight of Claire hunched over the mending pile. "You'll ruin your eyes before you're 30, Margaret said. "And for what?" "A pile of socks that'll be torn again by next week." Claire looked up and offered a small, tired smile. "Someone has to mend them. Someone." "Yes, not you." All alone in the dark, Margaret stepped closer and dropped a small bundle wrapped in a clean cloth onto the stool beside her. "Bread and cheese. You haven't eaten since morning, I'd wager." Claire's hand paused over the needle. She wanted to protest, to say she wasn't hungry, that she would eat later, that she didn't want to be a bother. But Margaret was already turning away, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't argue with me, child. An empty belly makes for crooked stitches. Eat. Then finish your work. And don't stay past sundown. The corridors get cold and you're thin as a rail." Claire watched the cook disappear through the doorway, her footsteps echoing down the stone passage. She unwrapped the bundle and found a thick slice of dark bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and a small apple, slightly bruised but still sweet-smelling. Her throat tightened. She had been in Ashford for nearly 5 months now. 5 months since she had arrived at the castle gates with nothing but a worn satchel and a letter of introduction from a merchant who had once owed her father a debt. 5 months of sleeping in a tiny cottage at the edge of the village, a converted mill that no one else wanted, and walking to the castle every morning to take whatever mending the housekeeper set aside for her. 5 months of being invisible, and mostly she preferred it that way. Invisibility was safe. Invisibility meant no one asked questions about where she had come from, or why she had no family, or why she flinched whenever someone mentioned the old noble houses of the southern valleys. Invisibility meant she could simply exist quietly in the margins of other people's lives, and that was enough. It had to be enough. She ate the bread and cheese slowly, savoring each bite, and saved the apple for later. Then she picked up the next sock, a thick woolen one of the kind worn by the castle guards, and set to work again. The afternoon wore on. The steam thinned as the fires under the vats died down, and the laundry grew quieter. Claire could hear the distant sounds of the castle settling into its evening routine, the clatter of pots from the kitchen, the bark of a dog in the courtyard, the murmur of voices as servants made their way to the great hall for supper. She was not invited to that supper. She was not a servant of the castle, not truly. She was a hireling, paid by the piece, and when the mending ran out, she would have no reason to return. She finished the last sock and set it aside, then began to gather her things. The light had faded almost completely now, and the laundry was dim and cold. She stood, stretching her back, and was about to blow out the tallow candle when she heard it. A sound, small scuffling just outside the door. Claire froze. The castle had its share of rats, but this was not the skitter of vermin. This was the patter of small feet, hushed whispers, the muffled giggle of a child trying very hard to be quiet. The door creaked open. 4 small heads appeared in the gap, one above the other like a stair-step of tousled hair and round, curious eyes. They were boys. 4 of them, all about the same age, all with the same shade of deep gold hair and the same serious gray eyes. Though their faces were smudged with what looked like jam and dust, Claire's needle slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. The tallest of the 4, barely reaching her waist, took a step forward. He had a scraped knee and a determined set to his jaw, and he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Are you the lady who mends things?" he asked. Claire swallowed. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Yes, I mend things." The boy nodded as if this confirmed something important. He glanced back at his brothers, who were still hovering in the doorway, watching with wide eyes. Then he turned back to her, and his small face grew very serious. "Pretend you're our mother," he said. The words hit Claire like a stone dropped into still water. She stared at him, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. What? "Pretend you're our mother," the boy repeated, taking another step closer. "Just for a little while. Just until Father comes back. We've never had a mother who mends things, and you're the right size for one." Behind him, the second boy, slightly shorter with a gap-toothed smile, nodded eagerly. "We looked for you. We asked Margaret who the lady with the needles was, and she said you fix everything. Mother would have fixed things, wouldn't she, if she were here?" Claire's throat closed. She had a sudden, terrible image of herself reaching out to touch the boy's hair, and she forced her hand to stay at her side. I don't think I can be your mother," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just a seamstress. I'm nobody." "You're not nobody," said the third boy, pushing past his brothers. He was rounder than the others, with a smudge of jam on his chin and a fiercely stubborn expression. "You're the lady who mends things. That's somebody." The fourth boy, the smallest, hung back near the door, clutching a scrap of cloth in his fist. He didn't speak, but his eyes were fixed on Claire with an intensity that made her chest ache. He was clutching the cloth so tightly that his knuckles were white. Claire knelt down, bringing herself to their eye level. The motion was automatic, unthinking, and it brought her face to face with the youngest boy. She could see now what he was holding, a small, frayed piece of woolen fabric, worn thin with age and handling. It looked like it had once been part of a larger garment, a cloak, perhaps, or a blanket. "What's that you have there?" she asked softly. The boy looked down at the scrap, then back at her. "It's Mama's," he said, his voice barely audible. "Father gave it to us. He said it smells like her." Claire's heart twisted. She could see the edge of the fabric was worn smooth from years of small hands clutching it. She knew without being told that this scrap was the closest thing these children had to a mother's presence. "That's a very precious thing," she said gently. "You take good care of it." The boy nodded solemnly and tucked the scrap back into his pocket. The tallest boy, the leader, cleared his throat. "So, will you do it? Will you pretend?" Claire opened her mouth to say no, to explain that she couldn't, that it wouldn't be right, that they should ask their father. But the words wouldn't come, because there was something in their eyes, something hungry and hopeful and terribly fragile, that she recognized. She had worn that same expression herself once, long ago, when she had stood at the gates of her family's house and begged them to let her in. They hadn't. "Just for a little while," the gap-toothed boy added, sensing her hesitation. "Until Father comes back from the fields. Please." Claire looked at their 4 small faces, all of them waiting, all of them hoping. She thought of the mended socks, the pile of torn shirts, the endless quiet days of being invisible. She thought of the apple in her satchel, the cold cottage waiting for her at the edge of the village, the empty room where no one would speak to her until morning. "All right," she heard herself say. "Just for a little while." The boys' faces lit up like candles. The smallest one let out a delighted squeak and clapped his hands over his mouth. The leader grinned, showing a missing front tooth. "Good," he said with the decisive air of a general winning a battle. "We'll come back tomorrow. We have a plan." "A plan?" "You'll see." He grabbed his brothers by the sleeves and began herding them toward the door. "Don't tell anyone, okay? It's a secret. Mother secrets." And then they were gone, a whirlwind of small limbs and muffled giggles, disappearing into the dark corridor and leaving. Claire alone in the silent laundry, with a dropped needle and a heart that would not stop pounding. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty doorway. Then she knelt down and picked up her needle, her fingers trembling slightly. She had promised to pretend. She had agreed to a game, a foolish, impossible game. And yet, as she gathered her mending and blew out the candle, she could not shake the feeling that something had shifted. Some small crack had opened in the walls she had built around herself, and through it, for the first time in years, she had felt the warmth of another person's need. What she did not see as she slipped out of the laundry and into the darkening courtyard was the tall figure standing in the shadow of the archway, motionless as stone. William of House Ashford, Alpha King of the Ashford lands, the iron-willed ruler of this cold northern realm, had been walking past the laundry when the sound of his sons' voices had stopped him in his tracks. He had heard every word, the plea, the hope, the soft, uncertain answer that had made his chest tighten with something he had not felt in 3 years. He watched Claire's slender figure cross the courtyard and disappear through the gate, and he did not move. His gray eyes, the same gray as his son's, were fixed on the spot where she had been, behind him, in the shadow of his own castle. The wind stirred the fallen leaves. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked, and the first stars of evening began to appear over the hills. And William of House Ashford, who had not allowed himself to hope in a very long time, found himself wondering what it would be like to have someone in his home who mended things. The morning came cold and pale, the kind of deep autumn morning when the frost clung to the window panes, and the smell of wood smoke hung low over the village. Claire woke before dawn, as she always did, and lay for a moment listening to the wind rattle the loose shutter of her little mill house. The events of the previous evening felt strange and distant, like a dream she had half forgotten, but the ache in her chest was real. The memory of 4 small faces turned up to hers, 4 voices asking her to pretend to be their mother. She had said yes, she hardly knew why. She had told herself it was only for a moment, only to soothe them. But the truth, if she dared to admit it, was that something in their hungry, hopeful eyes had reached into a place she had sealed off long ago. She dressed quickly, pulling her faded blue dress over her head and winding her chestnut hair into its usual low knot. Her fingers found the copper thimble in her pocket, the one she had carried with her through every mile of her long exile. She touched it for luck, as she did every morning. And then she set out for the castle. The castle kitchens were already bustling when she slipped in through the side door. Margaret, the head cook, stood at the great hearth, stirring a pot of porridge, her broad face flushed from the heat. She looked up the moment Claire entered. "There you are, child," Margaret said, her voice carrying over the clatter of pots. "Eat something before you start. You cannot mend socks on an empty stomach." Claire opened her mouth to say she was not hungry, but Margaret was already pushing a bowl of porridge into her hands, along with a thick slice of bread slathered with honey. Resistance was useless. Claire had learned that in her first week at the castle. She ate standing by the warmth of the hearth, listening to Margaret grumble about the quality of the flour and the laziness of the kitchen boys. It was a familiar rhythm, almost comforting. For a few minutes, Claire allowed herself to forget the strange promise she had made the evening before. She was just finishing her bread when she heard it, a patter of small feet in the corridor, and then a chorus of excited whispers that could only belong to one set of children. The 4 boys burst through the kitchen door like a small storm. Gabriel led the way, his dark gold hair sticking up in every direction, his gray eyes bright with purpose. Nathaniel and Sebastian followed close behind, and Christopher, the smallest, trailed at the back, clutching his precious scrap of old cloak. "Claire," Gabriel called, skidding to a stop in front of her. "We found you." Margaret made a disapproving sound. "Young lords, you know you are not supposed to run through the kitchens." "We are not running," Nathaniel said solemnly. "We are marching swiftly." Margaret snorted, but Claire could see the fondness hiding in her eyes. The boys were the castle's heart, even if they were also its chief source of chaos. Gabriel tugged at Claire's sleeve. "We have a plan," he said in a loud whisper. "A secret plan. You must come with us." Claire hesitated. She had work to do, piles of mending that would not do itself. But the boys' faces were so earnest, so full of hope, that she found herself setting down her empty bowl. "Very well," she said, "but only for a little while. I have socks that will not wait forever." The boys exchanged triumphant glances and then seized her hands, pulling her out of the kitchen and down the long stone corridor. They led her through a narrow passage she had never noticed before, past a dusty storeroom, and finally out into a small walled garden tucked behind the castle's eastern tower. In the corner of the garden stood an old oak tree, its branches bare and black against the pale sky, and in the crook of the tree, half hidden by the remains of last year's leaves, was a small wooden platform, a treehouse, roughly built, with a rope ladder dangling from its edge. "This is our fortress," Sebastian announced proudly. "No one is allowed in except us." "And you," Christopher added, looking up at Claire with his big gray eyes. "We decided you are allowed." Claire's throat tightened. She looked at the little treehouse, at the crooked boards and the frayed rope, at the 4 small boys watching her with such hopeful intensity, and she felt something crack open inside her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. "It is a fine fortress." Gabriel scrambled up the rope ladder first, then Nathaniel and Sebastian. Christopher hesitated at the bottom, looking up at the platform with a doubtful expression. Claire knelt down. "Would you like a boost?" she asked. Christopher nodded solemnly. She cupped her hands and he stepped into them, and she lifted him up until he could grasp the platform edge. Gabriel reached down and hauled him up the rest of the way. "Come up!" "Claire," Nathaniel called. "You must see the view." Claire looked at the rope ladder, then at the treehouse, then at the 4 small faces peering down at her. She had not climbed the tree since she was a child, since before everything had fallen apart. But the boys were waiting, and she could not bear to disappoint them. She climbed. The rope ladder swayed dangerously, and her dress caught on a splinter, and she nearly lost her footing twice. But she made it, pulling herself onto the platform with the boys laughing and cheering around her. The view was not much, a patch of gray sky, the castle wall, the rooftops of the village below. But the boys looked at it as though it were the whole world, and Claire found herself smiling despite herself. "This is where we come when we miss her," Gabriel said quietly, and the others grew still. "Our mother. We come here and we look at the sky, and we pretend she is looking back at us." Claire's heart ached. She looked at the 4 small boys, at the way Gabriel's voice had gone soft, at the way Christopher was clutching his scrap of cloak, and she said nothing. There were no words for a grief like that. She only sat with them in the cold morning air and let them be quiet together. They stayed in the treehouse until the castle bell rang for the midday meal. The boys climbed down reluctantly, and Claire followed, her hands raw from the rough rope. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Christopher asked, tugging at her skirt. Claire hesitated. She was only supposed to be their pretend mother, and only for a moment. But the word tomorrow hung in the air, full of promise. "We will see," she said gently. "Now go and eat your lunch. You must be hungry." The boys ran off toward the kitchens, shouting and laughing. Claire watched them go. and then she turned to make her way back to the laundry. She did not get far. A servant in the Alpha King's colors stopped her in the corridor. "The Alpha King requests your presence in his study," the servant said. "At once." Claire's stomach dropped. Her first thought was that she had done something wrong, that the boy's visit to the laundry had been reported, that she was about to be dismissed. She forced herself to nod and follow the servant, her heart hammering in her chest. The study was at the end of a long, quiet corridor. The servant knocked, and a deep voice from within said, "Enter." Claire stepped inside. The room was warm, lit by a crackling fire in the pale light of the afternoon. Shelves lined the walls, heavy with books and scrolls. At a large oak desk sat the Alpha King, William of House Ashford. She had seen him from a distance before, always in passing. She had noted his broad shoulders, his deep gold hair, the scar through his left eyebrow. She had never been this close to him, and she had never been alone with him. He looked up, and his gray eyes met hers. They were the same gray as his son's eyes, but there was no boyish openness in them. They were guarded, watchful. "You are Claire," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, my lord," she said, and then corrected herself quickly. "Yes, Alpha King, I mean, my lord. I am sorry." She dropped into a clumsy curtsy, her cheeks burning. William studied her for a long moment. "You need not curtsy in here," he said, "and you may address me as Alpha King or as my lord. You need not apologize." Claire nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. She could feel his gaze on her, and it took every ounce of her will not to fidget. "I understand you spoke with my sons yesterday," he said. So this was it. He knew. He was going to tell her to stay away from them, to remind her of her place. "Yes, my lord," she said quietly. "I am sorry. I did not mean to overstep. They asked me something, and I did not know how to refuse them." She pressed her hands together, her fingers finding the familiar edge of her thimble. "I am only a needlewoman, my lord. I did not intend to presume." There was a long silence. Claire dared to glance up and found William still watching her, his expression unreadable. "My sons have not spoken of their mother in over a year," he said slowly. "They have not spoken of her to anyone. And yesterday, after they left the laundry, they could not stop talking about you." Claire's breath caught. She did not know what to say. "They asked me," William continued, his voice quieter now, "if you could come and have tea with them in the nursery. I told them I would consider it." He paused, and something shifted in his gray eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. "There and gone. I am asking you," he said, "if you would be willing. They are not easy children. They are loud and unruly, and they do not listen well. But they have taken a liking to you, and I cannot remember the last time they took a liking to anyone." Claire stared at him. This was not what she had expected. She had expected coldness, distance, a reminder of the gulf between them. She swallowed. "I would be honored, my lord. I am not very good with children, but I would be glad to sit with them if it would please them." "Good," William said. He reached for the piece of parchment on his desk, then paused and looked at her again. "You have been mending socks for this household for 5 months." Claire nodded, surprised he knew the exact length of her employment. "Has anyone ever thanked you?" he asked. She blinked. "I do not do it for thanks." "My lord, no," William said quietly. "I imagine you do not." He did not say anything else. He only looked at her, and Claire felt herself flush under the weight of his gaze. She looked down at her hands, at the thimble on her finger. "If that is all." "My lord," she said, "I should return to my work. There are socks waiting." "Claire," he said, and she stopped. He had used her name. Not girl or you there or the needlewoman. Her name. "Yes. My lord?" William was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My sons' names. Do you know them? Gabriel, Nathaniel, Sebastian, and Christopher." she said without hesitation. Something like surprise crossed his face. I did not expect you to remember them all. They are not difficult to remember, Claire said softly. They are fine names, strong names. William was silent again, and Claire realized with a jolt that he was not looking at her with coldness anymore. He was looking at her as though he were seeing her for the first time. Thank you, he said. You may go. Oh, Claire curtsied again, quickly, and turned to leave. Her hand was on the door handle when his voice stopped her. Claire. She turned back. Yes, my lord? He was still watching her, and there was something in his expression she could not read. My sons have been through a great deal, he said. They have lost more than any child should lose. If you are to be around them, I ask that you be gentle with them. Claire looked at him, at the guarded gray eyes, at the lines of grief and exhaustion etched around his mouth. She thought of the treehouse, of Gabriel's quiet voice saying, This is where we come when we miss her. I will be gentle with them, she said. I promise. My lord. He nodded, and she slipped out the door, closing it softly behind her. She leaned against the corridor wall, her heart pounding. Her hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against the cold stone to steady herself. He had asked her to sit with his children. He had thanked her. He had called her by her name. She did not know what any of it meant. But as she walked back to the laundry, her fingers found the copper thimble in her pocket, and she realized that for the first time in a very long time, she was looking forward to tomorrow. That evening, as she sat in her little mill house by the fire, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find a basket on the doorstep. Inside was a loaf of fresh bread, a small wheel of cheese, and a bundle of wool socks, neatly folded. Tucked beneath the socks was a scrap of parchment. The handwriting was bold and angular, the hand of someone used to giving orders. For your trouble. Bew. Claire stood in the doorway, the basket in her arms, and looked out at the dark hills. Somewhere up in the castle, a lamp glowed in the window of the Alpha King's study. She carried the basket inside, and she did not tell anyone about the small, foolish hope that had taken root in her chest. The nursery tea was set for the hour after the midday meal, and Claire arrived at the door with her hands empty and her heart beating far too fast. She had considered bringing something, a small cake, a handful of dried flowers, but everything she owned seemed too plain for a king's children. In the end, she brought only herself and a pocket full of clean handkerchiefs, because Margaret had told her once that children always needed their noses wiped. The door swung open before she could knock. Gabriel stood there, his dark hair rumpled and his gray eyes, so like his father's, bright with expectation. You came, he said, and it was not a question, but a statement of wonder. As if he had half expected her to vanish like a dream. Behind him the other 3 boys tumbled over one another to see. Nathaniel was balancing a wooden sword on his palm. Sebastian had a smear of jam on his cheek. Christopher, the smallest, was clutching a battered rag doll by one leg, its straw stuffing peeking out at the seam. We saved you the best chair, Nathaniel announced, pointing to a low stool by the fire. It's the one that doesn't wobble. Claire stepped inside and let the warmth of the room wash over her. The nursery was a large, high-ceilinged chamber, but it had been made soft by use. Toy soldiers scattered across the hearthrug. A stack of picture books on the window seat, a child's drawing of a horse pinned crookedly to the wall. In the corner stood a small table laid with a chipped porcelain teapot and 4 mismatched cups, clearly borrowed from the kitchen. We poured it ourselves, Sebastian said proudly, gesturing at the tea. Margaret said we weren't allowed to touch the kettle, so we used cold water. It's still tea, sort of. Claire laughed, a sound that surprised even her. She had not laughed much in recent months. She sat down on the stool and accepted the cup Christopher pressed into her hands. The tea was indeed stone cold, but she drank it as if it were the finest brew in the land, and the boys beamed at her approval. For the better part of an hour they talked, or rather, the boys talked and Claire listened, which was exactly what they needed. Gabriel told her about the wooden sword, and how he was going to be a knight and protect his brothers. Nathaniel explained with great seriousness that he was going to be a map maker and draw every road in Ashford. Sebastian wanted to be a cook because of the sugar. Christopher said nothing, but he climbed into Claire's lap and laid his head against her shoulder, and she felt the small weight of him settle there like a cat choosing its place. She did not ask them about their mother. It seemed too soon, too heavy a question for a cold tea afternoon. But Christopher answered it anyway, in his own way. He pulled the rag doll from under his arm and held it up to her. "This is Mama," he said. She's made of cloth, so she can't die." The other 3 boys went very quiet. Claire felt the words land in her chest like stones. She looked at the doll, its button eyes, its faded calico dress, one arm sewn on slightly crooked, and she understood that this was not a toy. It was a memory, a small, stitched-together piece of something lost. "She's beautiful," Claire said softly, and she meant it. "Who made her for you?" "Mama did," Christopher said. "Before she went away. Papa says she made one for each of us. But we lost the others. I kept mine." Gabriel shifted uncomfortably and stared at the fire. "We don't talk about it much," he said, his voice quieter than before. "Papa gets sad." Claire nodded. She did not press. She simply smoothed Christopher's hair and said, "You were lucky to have someone who loved you enough to make you something with her own hands. That kind of love stays with you even when the person can't." Christopher looked up at her, his eyes wide and trusting. "Do you think she can see us? From up there? I think," Claire said carefully, "that if she can. She's very proud of you. All 4 of you." The moment stretched, fragile as spider silk. Then Nathaniel, who could never bear a silence for long, bounded to his feet and announced that they must show Claire the secret hiding place under the window seat where they kept their most important treasures. The tension broke, and the afternoon flowed on in a stream of small revelations, a collection of smooth river stones, a dried oak leaf pressed between 2 pages of a book, a feather from a hawk that Gabriel had found in the courtyard before she left. Christopher pressed something into her hand. It was a small, lopsided biscuit, charred on one edge and pale on the other. "We made it this morning," he said. "It's for you. It's a thank you for coming." Claire closed her fingers around it, feeling the warmth of it even through its burnt crust. "I will treasure it," she said, and she meant it with all her heart. She walked back toward the laundry through the long stone corridor, and that was when she saw it, draped carelessly over the back of a chair outside the great hall, as if someone had shed it in passing, was a heavy cloak of deep gray-blue wool. The Alpha King's cloak. She recognized it by the silver clasp shaped like a wolf's head, the emblem of House Ashford. She should have kept walking. It was not her place to touch his things. But she noticed, in the fading light from the high window, that the inner lining had come loose along one seam. A long, ragged tear ran from the shoulder nearly to the hem. The stitching unraveled and frayed. It must have snagged on something, a branch, a piece of armor, and no one had thought to mend it, or perhaps no one had dared. Claire hesitated. Then, with a quick glance up and down the empty corridor, she lifted the cloak from the chair and folded it carefully over her arm. It smelled of wood smoke and leather and something faintly herbal, like the soap in the castle's bathing rooms. She carried it to her corner of the laundry, where the light was good and her needles lay ready. She worked by the last of the afternoon sun, then by candlelight. The tear was worse than she had expected. The wool had frayed along the edges, and the inner lining was a soft, worn linen that had split clean along the seam. She chose a thread the color of the lining, a pale cream that would disappear into the weave, and she set to work with the same careful patience she had always brought to her mending. Her mother had taught her to sew when she was 5 years old. Sitting on a stool in the kitchen of a house she no longer allowed herself to remember. "A good seam," her mother had said, "is one that holds even when the heart doesn't. You mend the cloth, and somehow you mend a little of yourself along with it." Claire had not thought of those words in years. Now they came back to her as her needle moved in and out. drawing the torn edges together, making them whole. She thought about Christopher's rag doll and the love that had been stitched into it. She thought about the 4 boys, so eager and so hungry for someone to stay. She thought about William, the Alpha King who ruled an entire territory with iron will, and yet could not bear to look at his own children's grief. By the time she finished, the candle had burned down to a stub, and the moon was high over the hills. She inspected her work by the flickering light. The seam was invisible, the lining restored to smoothness, the tear gone as if it had never been. She ran her fingers over it once, then twice, and allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She carried the cloak back to the chair where she had found it and draped it exactly as it had been, so that no one would know it had ever been touched. Then she walked home through the cold night, her breath pluming in the moonlight, and she did not tell a single soul what she had done. She did not expect to be noticed. She did not expect thanks. That was not why she had mended it. But the next morning, as she was sorting linens in the laundry, she heard footsteps in the corridor, heavy footsteps, the stride of someone who did not hurry. She looked up to see the Alpha King standing in the doorway, his gray-blue cloak draped over his shoulders, the wolf's head clasp gleaming at his throat. He did not say anything at first. He simply stood there looking at her, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. She dropped her eyes to the floor, her fingers tightening on the linen in her hands. "Claire," he said, and his voice was lower than she remembered. Rougher. "Did you mend this cloak?" She could have lied. She should have lied. But her cheeks flushed, and she could not seem to make her mouth form the words. I noticed the tear," she said very quietly. "It was going to get worse if it was left. I thought it might snag on something and rip further, and the lining would be ruined. And I'm sorry. I should have asked. I shouldn't have touched your things. Claire." He cut her off, and she fell silent, her heart hammering. He took a step closer, and she saw that his gray eyes were not angry. They were something else, something she could not name. "My wife used to mend my cloaks," he said. "She was the only one who ever did. I thought I would never feel that again. Someone taking care of the small things without being asked." Claire did not know what to say. She stood frozen, the linen clutched to her chest, her face burning. William looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached up and touched the shoulder of his cloak, where the invisible seam lay beneath his fingers. "The stitchwork is beautiful," he said. "Thank you." He turned and walked away before she could respond, but she saw it, the way his hand lingered on the seam, the way his shoulders seemed a little less rigid than before. Claire stood in the doorway of the laundry, watching his broad back disappear down the corridor, and she felt something shift in her chest. Something small and fragile, like the first crack in a frozen river. She did not tell anyone about it, but that afternoon, when she passed the nursery door, she heard Gabriel say to his brothers, "Papa smiled today. At the table. He never smiles." And Claire walked on, her heart full to bursting, and she did not let herself wonder what it meant. The afternoon after the cloak, Claire found herself standing in the kitchen doorway, staring at a scene she had not expected. 4 small boys, all in a row, were balanced on upturned barrels, reaching toward the high shelf where Margaret kept the honey jar. Gabriel had a wooden spoon in his teeth. Nathaniel was standing on Sebastian's shoulders, and Christopher was holding Nathaniel's ankles, wobbling dangerously. "Higher," Nathaniel hissed. "I can almost—" "What in the name of all that is holy?" Margaret's voice boomed from the pantry. The boys froze. The honey jar wobbled. Claire moved without thinking, crossing the kitchen in 4 quick strides and catching the jar just as it tipped off the shelf. "I have it," she said breathlessly, setting it down on the table. "It is safe." Margaret emerged from the pantry, flour dusting her apron, a rolling pin in one hand. She took one look at the 4 guilty faces in the barrels and the honey jar on the table, and her eyes narrowed. "Sneaking sweets again," she said. "Your father will hear of this." "No, please," Gabriel said quickly. We were not stealing. We were fetching. For a guest. A guest, Margaret repeated flatly. Her, Christopher said, pointing at Claire. We wanted to make her something. Because she mended Papa's cloak. And she is our mother now. And mothers get treats. Claire's heart squeezed. She opened her mouth. But no words came. Margaret looked at Christopher, then at the honey jar, then at Claire. Something in her weathered face softened, though she would never admit it. Treats, she said. You wanted to make her treats, and the best plan you four could think of was to climb my shelves like a gang of thieving squirrels. We are knights, Nathaniel corrected. We are the knights of the kitchen. You are the knights of the kitchen floor, is what you are, Margaret said. But there was no real bite in it. She set the rolling pin down and wiped her hands on her apron. All right, if you want to make something for your mother, you will do it properly, with my help, and with flour. Which means mess, the boys cheered. Claire looked at Margaret, startled. I should not stay. I have mending to finish. You will stay. Margaret said firmly. The mending can wait. These four have been plotting sweets all morning, and if I let them loose in my kitchen alone, they will burn the whole castle down. You are the reason they are here. You will help. It was not a request. Claire found herself being handed an apron before she could protest. Margaret tied it around her waist with brisk efficiency, and then the boys were swarming around her, tugging at her sleeves, chattering all at once. Can we make apple pie? Papa likes apple pie. We have apples in the cellar, big ones. I want to do the mixing. No, I want to do the mixing. You did it last time. There was no last time. Enough, Margaret said, and the boys fell silent. We are making apple tarts, small ones, because small ones are easier to handle and harder to burn. And you will follow my instructions to the letter, or you will sit in the corner and watch the rest of us eat. Yes, Margaret, the boys chorused. Claire hid a smile behind her hand. The next hour was chaos, and it was the most beautiful chaos Claire had seen in years. Margaret rolled out the dough on the big oak table and gave each boy a small lump of it. They flattened it with their palms, pounded it with their fists, and one of them, Christopher, managed to get more flour on his face than on the dough. Sebastian was methodical, pressing his thumb carefully around the edges. Gabriel attacked his dough with fierce concentration, as if he were molding a shield for battle, and Nathaniel kept sneaking bits of it into his mouth. You are eating raw dough, Margaret said without looking up. It is delicious, Nathaniel said thickly. You will have a stomachache, and then you will cry, and then I will say I told you so. Worth it. Claire peeled the apples. Margaret had given her a small knife and a bowl, and she sat at the end of the table working the peels into long, even curls. The boys watched her, fascinated. How do you do that so neat? Christopher asked. Practice, Claire said. I have peeled a great many apples. Were you a cook before? No, she hesitated. I was a lady's companion. Before, I did mending, and sometimes I helped in the kitchen when they were short-handed. Do you like mending? I do. It is quiet. And it lets me think. I like watching you think, Christopher said solemnly. You make a face like this. He scrunched up his nose and squinted. The other boys burst into laughter. Claire laughed too, a sound that surprised her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed like that. All right, Margaret said, clapping her hands. Fillings next. Claire, show them how to mix the sugar and cinnamon. Claire measured the sugar into a bowl, and the boys took turns stirring. Nathaniel got cinnamon on his nose. Sebastian got it in his hair. Gabriel stirred so hard the bowl nearly tipped, and Claire had to put her hand over his to slow him down. Gently, she said. Like this. Small circles. You do not have to beat it into submission. It is very strong sugar, Gabriel said defensively. It is sugar. Gabriel, it is not a wild boar. The boys dissolved into giggles. Claire felt something loosen in her chest. A tightness she had been carrying for so long, she had forgotten it was there. They filled the little tart shells, piled the apple slices high. and Margaret slid the trays into the big stone oven while they waited. The boys crowded around Claire, asking her questions about everything: her favorite color, her favorite animal, whether she had ever seen the sea, whether she knew how to skip stones, whether she could whistle through her teeth. "I can whistle," Claire said. "Show us," Christopher demanded. Claire put her fingers to her lips and whistled a clear, bright note that rang through the kitchen. The boys stared at her with round eyes. "You are magic," Nathaniel breathed. "I am not magic," Claire said, laughing. "I am just a person who learned to whistle. You are magic to us," Gabriel said quietly. And Claire did not know what to say to that. The tarts came out golden and steaming, the edges crisp, the smell of cinnamon and baked apple filling the kitchen. Margaret pulled them onto a wooden board to cool, and the boys hovered around her, hopping from foot to foot. "They need to rest," Margaret said. "If you eat them now, you will burn your tongues. But they smell so good." "Rest," Margaret repeated firmly. "Go wash your faces. You are all covered in flour." The boys tripped over to the water basin, and Claire followed to help. She wet a cloth and knelt down, wiping Christopher's face, then Sebastian's, then Nathaniel's, then Gabriel's. They submitted to it with exaggerated patience, making faces at each other over her shoulder. "You have flour in your ear," Claire said to Gabriel. "It is my secret flour," Gabriel said. "For emergencies." "What kind of emergency requires flour in the ear?" "You never know." Claire shook her head, smiling, and stood up. The kitchen was warm and loud and smelled of apples, and she thought, This is what a home must feel like. She had not had a home in so long she had forgotten. It was then that she noticed the doorway. William stood in the threshold, still in his cloak, the cloak with the mended seam, one hand resting on the doorframe. He was not frowning. He was not scowling. He was just standing there, watching. His gray eyes moving from the boys to Claire to the trays of tarts to the flour dusting every surface. The kitchen went quiet. "Papa," Christopher said happily, "we made tarts." "For our mother." William's gaze shifted to Claire. She felt her face heat and looked down at her flour-covered hands, suddenly very aware of the mess of her apron, of the fact that she had laughed in his kitchen. She started. "I did not mean to intrude. My lord, the boys wanted— I was only helping. They wanted you here," William said. His voice was low, rough, like he had not used it in a while. "I can see that." "He sees that." Margaret muttered under her breath, and Claire shot her a desperate look. William stepped into the kitchen. He crossed to the board of tarts and looked down at them. The golden crusts, the bubbling filling. Then he looked at his sons. Flour in their hair, flour in their ears, grins on their faces. "They are not burned," he said. "Of course they are not burned," Margaret said. "I was supervising. Mostly." "Mostly," William repeated, and there was the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. He reached out and took one of the tarts, biting into it carefully. The boys watched him, holding their breath. "It is good," he said. "Very good." The boys cheered. Christopher launched himself at William's legs, and William caught him with one arm, the tart still in his other hand. "Can we eat ours now?" Nathaniel demanded. "Yes," William said, "but share with Claire. She helped make them." The boys grabbed tarts and swarmed around Claire, pressing pieces into her hands, telling her to try this one and that one. The ones with the most cinnamon, the ones with the best crust. Claire found herself with her hands full of apple tart, a boy tucked against each side, and William watching from the doorway with something soft in his gray eyes. She looked away, her face warm, and bit into the tart. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. Later, when the tarts were gone and the boys were sticky and satisfied, William walked Claire to the castle door. The evening was coming on, the sky turning deep blue, the first stars pricking through. "Thank you," he said, "for this afternoon. They have not—" He stopped. started again. They have not been this happy in a long time. They are good boys, Claire said. They just needed someone to make a mess with. They needed you, William said. The words hung in the air between them. Claire did not know what to say. She looked at her hands, still faintly dusted with flour, and felt something fragile and precious settle in her chest. I should go, she said. The mending? It can wait until tomorrow, William said. You have done enough for one day. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth, clean and folded. He pressed it into her hand. For your hands, he said. You have flour on them. Claire looked at the cloth. It was fine linen, soft, the kind a lord would carry. She opened her mouth to thank him, but he was already turning away, his cloak swinging, the mended seam hidden beneath his arm. She walked home in the dark, the cloth clutched in her hand, and she did not know why she was smiling. That night, when the boys were tucked into their beds, Gabriel whispered to his brothers, She laughed today. I heard her. I heard her too, Sebastian said. Do you think she will come back tomorrow? She promised. Christopher said sleepily. She said she would teach us to make bread. Good, Nathaniel mumbled, already half asleep. Then we can be the knights of the bread, in the corridor outside. William stood in the shadow, listening to his sons' voices drift into silence. He did not go to his study. He did not light the lamp. He stood there for a long time in the dark, thinking about flour in his son's hair and a woman's quiet laugh and the way the mended seam of his cloak had held all day without a single loose thread. He pressed his hand to the seam, and he let himself imagine, for the first time in 3 years, what it might be like to come home to someone. The fever came on quietly, the way all bad things do. It was Gabriel who woke first, his small body burning against the linen sheets. He did not cry out. He lay very still, staring at the dark ceiling, because he had learned that crying brought no one in the night. His father was often away, and the servants who watched them slept in the far wing, so he simply lay there, shivering and sweating at the same time, until his brother Nathaniel rolled over and felt the heat radiating from his skin. Gabriel. Nathaniel whispered. You are too warm, I know, Gabriel said. His voice was small and thick. Do not wake the others. But Nathaniel was already scrambling out of bed, his bare feet hitting the cold stone floor with a slap that echoed down the corridor. He did not know where to go. He only knew that his brother was burning, and that the darkness felt too big, and that somewhere in this vast castle there had to be someone who would know what to do. He ran. He ran past the empty great hall, past the silent kitchens, past the guards who startled but did not stop him. And then, without quite knowing how he got there, he found himself at the door of the small chamber near the laundry, where the woman with the gentle hands slept. He pounded on the door with both fists. Claire opened it, still tying the sash of her worn wool robe, her hair loose and tangled from sleep. She took one look at the boy's white face and did not ask a single useless question. She simply knelt, took his cold little hands in hers, and said, Show me. The nursery was lit by a single candle when they arrived. Gabriel lay curled on his side, his cheeks flushed, his breath coming in shallow, uneven pulls. Claire crossed the room in 3 steps and laid the back of her hand against his forehead. The heat of him made her breath catch. Fetch water, she said to Nathaniel, her voice calm and steady, even as her heart hammered. Cold water and a clean cloth. Can you do that? Nathaniel nodded and fled. Claire sat on the edge of the bed and gathered Gabriel into her lap, cradling him the way one might hold a much smaller child. He was 6, all gangly limbs and scraped knees, but in that moment he seemed impossibly small. His eyes fluttered open, glassy with fever, and he looked up at her. Pretend you are my mother, he whispered, the words slurred and drowsy. Just for tonight. Claire's throat closed. She pressed her lips to his hot forehead and said, I am right here. I am not going anywhere. The other 2 boys woke in the commotion. Sebastian sat up. up, rubbing his eyes, and Christopher crawled to the foot of the bed, his lower lip trembling. Claire did not try to send them back to sleep. She simply held out one arm, and they both scrambled into the circle of it, pressing against her sides like small animals seeking warmth. Nathaniel returned with a basin of cold water and a scrap of clean linen. Claire dipped the cloth, wrung it out, and laid it across Gabriel's forehead. He shivered, then sighed, and his small hand found the edge of her sleeve and held on. "Sing," Christopher whispered. "When we are sick." "Papa sings." Claire had not sung in years. She had not had anyone to sing to. But she opened her mouth, and a soft, wordless hum came out, low and steady. The kind of tune a mother might use to smooth a child's dreams. She hummed it over and over, dipping the cloth, cooling Gabriel's skin, while the candle burned down and the night pressed against the windows. William was in the south courtyard when the guard found him, still in his riding cloak from the day's patrol. The fever had reached him as a whisper passed from servant to guard to messenger, and he crossed the castle in long, pounding strides, his boots ringing against the stone. He did not know what he expected to find. He had braced himself for chaos, for crying, for the helpless terror he remembered too well from 3 years ago, when the nursemaid had come to him with white lips and the words, "The Lady Eleanor is asking for you." But the nursery door was ajar, and the light inside was warm and low. He pushed the door open and stopped. His 4 sons were arranged around Claire like the spokes of a wheel. Gabriel lay in her lap, his fever-flushed face peaceful in sleep, a damp cloth folded across his forehead. Nathaniel had fallen asleep with his head on her knee. Sebastian had one arm thrown across her waist. Christopher had tucked himself under her arm, his small fist clutching the edge of her sleeve. And Claire was humming. She was not aware of him. Her eyes were closed, her head tilted slightly back. And the sound that came from her was so soft, so private, that William felt like an intruder in his own home. He stood in the doorway and watched. He watched the way her hand moved, smoothing Gabriel's hair back from his brow with a tenderness that made something in his chest crack open. He watched the way she shifted, adjusting her weight so that Christopher could sleep more comfortably. He watched the way she did all of this without once looking for praise, without once glancing toward the door to see if anyone was watching. His wife had been like that. Eleanor had moved through the world with that same quiet, giving grace, and for 3 years William had told himself that he would never find it again, that it was a thing that happened once in a man's life and then was gone forever. He stood in the doorway, and he felt the lie of that belief crack at his feet. Claire did not hear him approach. She was too focused on the rhythm of Gabriel's breathing, which had finally evened out into the deep, steady rhythm of true sleep. The fever had broken an hour ago, leaving the boy's skin damp and cool, and she had let herself rest her cheek against the top of his head. She felt a presence before she saw it, a shift in the air, a weight. She looked up, and William was there, standing at the foot of the bed, his gray eyes unreadable in the candlelight. She expected anger. She expected suspicion, or the cold distance he had shown her in the study weeks ago. She expected to be dismissed, sent back to her small cottage with a warning to keep her place. Instead, he lowered himself onto the edge of the bed, very slowly, as if the weight of the night had settled into his bones. He reached out, and his large hand, scarred, calloused, a warrior's hand, brushed Gabriel's cheek with a gentleness that made Claire's breath catch. The fever broke, she said softly. It came out as a question. "An hour ago," she said. "He will be all right. Children burn hot, but they cool fast. By morning he will be demanding porridge." William said nothing. His hand lingered on his son's hair, and then he withdrew it and sat back, staring at the candle flame. "You did not have to stay," he said at last. His voice was rough, unused to softness. "You could have called a servant. You could have left him to me." "He was afraid," Claire said simply. "He did not want to be alone." The words hung between them in the quiet room. Claire saw something move across William's face, a flicker, quickly suppressed. She looked away, giving him the privacy of it. "I will go now," she said, beginning to ease Christopher off her lap. "He will sleep through the night. If the fever returns, send for the healer, but I do not think it will." She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. "Claire." She turned. He was still sitting on the edge of the bed, his head bowed, his shoulders broad and heavy under the weight of his cloak. "Eleanor," he said, and the name came out like something precious and fragile held too long in the dark. "My wife. She used to sing to them when they were small. I do not remember the tune anymore." Claire stood very still. She understood in that moment that he was not telling her about his wife. He was telling her that he had been alone for a long time, and that he had forgotten how to let anyone in. "What was her name?" Claire asked softly. "The full name." "Eleanor of the Thornwood," William said. "She had hair the color of autumn leaves, and she laughed at my jokes even when they were not funny." His voice cracked just slightly, and he looked down at his hands. "She told me before the end, she told me to find someone who would sing to them." A long silence stretched between them. Claire did not move. She did not fill the silence with useless words. She simply stood there, holding the space for him the way one holds a door open for someone carrying something heavy. "Your cloak," she said at last, her voice quiet. "The seam I mended. It held." William looked up, and for a moment something passed between them. A thread, visible but strong, drawn tight across the distance of the room. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it. Claire left before dawn, slipping out of the castle while the sky was still gray and the servants were just beginning to stir. She walked back to her small cottage with her hands wrapped in her shawl and her mind full of candlelight and the weight of a sleeping child. She had been up all night. She should have been exhausted. But as she pushed open her door and saw the cold hearth and the lonely chair by the window, she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt the absence of noise. The cottage had never seemed so quiet before. She had never minded the quiet. She had chosen it after everything, had wrapped herself in it like a blanket. But now, standing in the gray morning light, she found herself listening for small voices, for the patter of bare feet, for the sound of a deep, gruff voice saying her name. She sat down in the chair by the window and pressed her hand to her chest, where something warm and frightened and hopeful was beating. She had not asked to be needed. She had not asked for any of this. But somewhere between the mending of a cloak and the burning of a fever, the walls she had built around herself had begun, very quietly, to crumble. The boys woke one by one. Gabriel's fever was gone, leaving him pale and hungry. Nathaniel brought him water. Sebastian demanded to know if the woman with the gentle hands was coming back. Christopher crawled to the window and pressed his nose to the glass, searching the path that led to the village. "She is gone," he said, his voice small. "She is coming back," Gabriel said firmly. He touched the cloth that was still folded on the pillow beside him, the one she had used to cool his forehead. He lifted it and pressed it to his nose, inhaling the faint smell of her, wood smoke and lavender, the scent of the little dried flowers she kept pressed in her book. "She will come back," he said again, as if saying it twice would make it true. In the corridor outside, William stood with his hand on the doorframe, listening. He had not slept. He had spent the night in the chair by the window, watching the candle burn down, thinking about a woman who sang to his sons when they were afraid. He pressed his hand to the mended seam of his cloak, and he felt it hold. The news traveled faster than a winter fire through dry grass. By midday, every woman in the village had heard that the seamstress from the mill house had spent the night in the castle alone with the Alpha King and his 4 sons. By evening, the story had grown teeth. Edith was the one who started it. She was the butcher's wife, a broad-shouldered woman with a voice that carried from the well to the mill house without effort. She stood at the village square with her arms crossed, her mouth a thin line of disapproval. Mark my words, she said to the women gathered around her. A woman who appears from nowhere, who takes work in the castle without a reference, who stays the night in the king's own wing. That is not a woman of virtue. That is a woman with a plan. The other women murmured. Some of them nodded. A few looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Because Edith was the kind of woman you did not argue with, unless you wanted to find yourself without butter or eggs at market. Claire heard none of this. She had spent the morning after her night at the castle in a state of quiet confusion, her hands moving through her sewing as if they belonged to someone else. She had replayed the night 100 times, the weight of Gabriel in her arms, the sound of her own voice singing a song she had not sung in years, the look on William's face when he had spoken his wife's name. She had not meant to stay so long. She had not meant to stay at all. But the boy had been burning, and his brothers had been afraid, and there had been no one else. She pressed her hand to her chest where the memory of his heartbeat against her palm still lingered. I should not have stayed, she whispered to the empty room. I was not. She could not finish the sentence because she did not know how to end it. She was not his mother. She was not their mother. She was a seamstress who had been kind to a sick child, and that was all. But the ache in her chest told her it was not that simple. The knock came at her door just after noon. Claire opened it to find Margaret standing on the step, her face uncharacteristically grim. The cook held a basket of bread and cheese, but she did not offer it immediately. She looked at Claire for a long moment, and then she stepped inside without being invited. Sit down, child, Margaret said, setting the basket on the table. We need to talk. Claire sat. Her hands found each other in her lap, fingers twisting. What is it? Are the boys... Is Gabriel... The boys are fine, Margaret said. Gabriel is up and about, eating porridge like he has not seen food in a week. The king is in his study, doing whatever it is kings do when they are not being glared at by their own cooks. She paused. It is the village that is not fine. Claire's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Margaret crossed her arms. Edith has been talking. By now, she has talked to half the village. She is saying that you spent the night in the king's chambers alone, with no one to vouch for you. She is saying it was not to tend a sick child, but to... Margaret's jaw tightened. I will not repeat the words she used. They are not fit for a woman's ears. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. I was with the boys the whole night. I did not leave the nursery. I did not... I know, Margaret said, and her voice was gentler than Claire had ever heard it. I know, child. But the village does not know. And Edith is not interested in the truth. She is interested in the stories she can tell. Claire looked down at her hands. The thread of her sewing was still looped around her finger. A thin red line. She had forgotten to take it off. What am I supposed to do? Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You are supposed to hold your head up and let the talk pass. That is what I would tell my own daughter if I had one. You have done nothing wrong, and the king knows it. And the boys know it. That is what matters. Claire nodded, but the knot in her stomach did not loosen. She had been here before, not in this village, not in this house, but in this feeling. The feeling of eyes on her back, of whispers that stopped when she entered a room, the feeling of being judged for a crime she had not committed, and knowing that no explanation would ever be enough. She had been 11 years old the last time she had felt it. She had worn a fine dress then, and the whispers had been about her family, about her father's debts, about the scandal that had brought the house of Ashford's old allies to ruin. She had learned at 11 that the truth does not protect you from the stories people tell. She had learned to leave before the stories could catch her. Margaret, she said quietly, I think I should stop going to the castle for a while. The cook's eyebrows shot up. What? Child, the boys will be heartbroken. I cannot be the cause of more talk, Claire said, and her voice shook. The king has enough to bear without the village whispering about him because of a seamstress. If I stay away, it will pass. They will find someone else to talk about. Margaret opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She looked at Claire's face, at the fear in her eyes, and she seemed to understand something that Claire had not said. "All right, child," she said finally, "but you will eat, and you will not hide in this house like a mouse. If you want to sit by the river with your sewing, you will sit by the river, and if Edith wants to stare at you, she can stare until her eyes fall out." Claire managed a small smile. "That is very kind of you." "It is not kind," Margaret said. "It is practical. A woman who does not eat cannot sew, and a woman who cannot sew is useless to me in the kitchen." She pointed a finger at Claire. "You will come to the kitchen at dusk, and you will help me with the bread, and you will not argue." Claire nodded, and Margaret left. And the silence of the little mill house closed in around her again. She did not go to the castle that day. She did not go the next day either. She sat in her house with her sewing, and she listened to the wind, and she told herself that she was doing the right thing, that the boys would forget her, that the king would find another seamstress, that it was better this way for everyone. But she could not stop thinking about Gabriel's hand clutching her sleeve in the dark. She could not stop thinking about Christopher's small voice asking her to sing. She could not stop thinking about the way William had looked at her when he had spoken his wife's name, as if he were handing her a piece of his heart and trusting her not to drop it. On the third day, a small figure appeared at her door. Claire opened it to find Nathaniel standing on the step, his face red from running, his breath coming in short puffs. He was wearing his tunic inside out, and there was a leaf in his hair. "Claire," he said, and his voice was thick. "Why did you not come?" Claire's throat tightened. She knelt down in front of him. "Nathaniel, You said you would come back," he said, and his chin wobbled. "Gabriel said you would come back. He said you promised, but you did not come. And Christopher has been crying. And Sebastian said maybe you did not want to be our mother after all. And I told him he was stupid. But he stopped, and a tear rolled down his cheek. You do want to stay, do you not? You are not going to leave like—" He did not finish the sentence. But Claire heard the word he did not say. Like our mother. Like the mother they had never known. She pulled him into her arms, and she held him, and she felt his small body shake with sobs. "Oh, my dear," she whispered. "Oh, my sweet boy, I am so sorry. I am so sorry." "You did not come," he said again. His voice muffled against her shoulder. "You said you would come back, and you did not come." "I was frightened," Claire said, because she did not know what else to say. "I was frightened that I would cause trouble for your father." Nathaniel pulled back and looked at her with the fierce, uncompromising logic of a 6-year-old. "You cannot cause trouble. You are a mother. Mothers do not cause trouble." Claire's heart cracked. "Nathaniel, I am not." "You are," he said. "You are our mother now. We decided, and you cannot leave. Because mothers do not leave." He said it so simply, so absolutely, that Claire did not have the heart to argue. She held him, and she rocked him, and she sang him the same song she had sung to Gabriel in the dark, and she felt something in her chest begin to heal. That night, Claire walked back to the castle. She did not go to the main hall, where the women might see her. She went through the kitchen entrance, where Margaret was waiting with a warm loaf of bread and a look that said, "I told you so." "The boys are in the nursery," Margaret said. "The king is in his study. He has not eaten properly in 3 days." Claire's heart twisted. "He is worried about the southern flocks." "He is worried about more than the flocks," Margaret said, but she did not elaborate. Claire climbed the stairs to the nursery, and she pushed open the door, and she found the 4 boys sitting in a circle on the floor, their heads bent together over something small and worn. It was the old cloak fragment, the one they kept in the wooden box by Gabriel's bed, the one they said smelled like their mother. Gabriel looked up when she entered, and his face went through a dozen emotions in the space of a second. Surprise, hope, relief, and finally a fierce, determined joy. "You came back," he said. "I came back," Claire said, and she knelt down beside them. "I am sorry I was away so long. You were frightened," Nathaniel said, as if it were a perfectly reasonable thing. "But you do not have to be frightened anymore. We will protect you. All 4 of us, Sebastian added. We are knights, and knights protect their mothers. Christopher, who had been silent, crawled over to her and pressed the cloak fragment into her hands. You can have this, he said solemnly. It is our mother's, but you are our mother now, so it is yours too. Claire looked down at the small, worn piece of fabric in her hands. It was soft from years of handling, faded from washing. She lifted it to her nose and she smelled it, and she understood why the boys kept it. It smelled like home, like safety, like a mother's love preserved in cloth and memory. Thank you, she said, and her voice was thick. I will keep it safe. The boys gathered around her, and she sat with them on the floor of the nursery, and she listened to them talk about their day, about the bird they had seen from the window, about the stone Sebastian had found that looked like a bear, about the game they had invented where they were knights defending the castle from dragons. She stayed until the candles burned low, and she tucked each boy into bed, and she kissed each forehead. Gabriel first, then Nathaniel, then Sebastian, then Christopher, smallest of all. And as she was leaving, Gabriel caught her hand. Claire, he said, his voice sleepy. Will you be here in the morning? Claire looked at him, at his gray eyes so like his father's, and she made a promise that she was not sure she could keep. Yes, she said. I will be here. She walked down the stairs, and she was halfway across the great hall when she saw him. William stood by the fireplace, his back to her, one hand braced against the stone mantel. He had not heard her approach, and he did not turn. She should have left. She should have slipped out through the kitchen and walked home in the dark, and let him think she had only come to see the boys. But something held her in place. He was still wearing the cloak she had mended. She could see the seam she had stitched, neat and strong, running along the inner lining. He had worn it every day since she had sewn it. She had not noticed until now. She took a step toward him. My lord. He turned, and his face was tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. He looked at her for a long moment, and something moved in his gray eyes. They did not believe you would come back, he said. I told them you would. Claire's breath caught. You told them I would come back. I told them you had not left, William said. I told them you were this kind of woman who kept her promises. He did not say what else he might have told them. He did not say what he had told himself. But Claire heard it anyway, in the quiet of the great hall, in the weight of his gaze. She did not know what to say, so she said the only thing that felt true. I kept my promise, she said. I came back. The days after Claire returned to the castle were quiet in a way that felt wrong. The children were happy to see her, clinging to her skirts at every opportunity, but the women of the village were not so forgiving. They did not shout at her. They did not confront her. They simply looked away when she passed, and that was worse. Claire told herself she did not mind. She had been looked away from before. She had been whispered about before. She had learned long ago how to make herself small enough to fit into the corners of other people's contempt. So she went about her work, mending the linens and the tapestries, and she did not let herself think about the way Edith's voice had carried across the well that morning. But the children noticed. Children always noticed things that adults thought they had hidden well. On the 5th evening, Gabriel found her in the sewing room, sitting alone with a half-mended tunic in her lap. He did not say anything at first. He just climbed onto the stool beside her and sat there, his small legs swinging. You are sad, he said finally. Claire looked up from her stitching. I am not sad. Sweetling, you are, Gabriel said. You are sad the way Papa is sad. You are sad the way Papa was sad before you came. She did not know what to say to that. She set down the tunic and pulled him onto her lap. And he let her, pressing his face into her shoulder. He smelled of wood smoke and the bread Margaret had given him for supper. I am not sad, she whispered into his hair. I am just tired. He did not believe her. She could tell by the way he held on to her, his small fingers gripping the wool of her dress. But he did not argue, and she was grateful for that. The next morning, William came to her cottage. She had not expected him to come. She had told herself, after the night in the great hall, that whatever had passed between them had been a kindness born of exhaustion. Nothing more. So when she heard the heavy tread of boots on her doorstep and opened the door to find him standing there, she nearly dropped the basket of mending she was carrying. He did not speak at first. He stood in the gray morning light, his deep gold hair damp from the mist, his gray eyes unreadable. He was wearing the cloak she had sewn. She could see the neat line of stitches running along the interlining, and her heart did something complicated at the sight of it. "I have been passing by," he said. "I thought you might need more wood." She blinked. "My lord?" He gestured toward the side of the cottage where she kept her small stack of firewood. She looked, and her breath caught. The stack had grown. There was fresh-cut oak there, split and stacked so neatly that it looked as though it had been done by a man who was used to doing things thoroughly. "You have been leaving wood," she said slowly. He did not deny it. He did not confirm it either. He just stood there looking at her with that steady gray gaze that made her feel as though she were being seen for the first time in her life. "The basket," he said. "There is something in it." She looked down. There was a small basket at the foot of her door, one she had not noticed before. It was filled with apples, red and glossy, with a bit of cheese wrapped in cloth and a small loaf of fresh bread. "Margaret sends her regards," William said. Claire did not know what to say. She had been so careful not to expect anything from anyone. And yet here he was, standing on her doorstep in the mist, leaving her firewood and apples as though she were someone worth caring for. "You should not," she said. "My lord, you should not trouble yourself." "It is no trouble," he said, and then, before she could argue, he turned and mounted his horse, which she had not even noticed, tethered by the fence. He did not look back as he rode away, but he did not need to. She stood in the doorway for a long time after he was gone, holding the basket of apples against her chest, feeling something warm and frightening bloom in her rib cage. The children did not come to the castle the next day, and Claire found that she missed them more than she could bear. She had grown accustomed to their laughter, their endless questions, their small hands tugging at her sleeves. She had grown accustomed to the way Gabriel looked at her with his father's steady gray eyes, and the way Nathaniel laughed with his whole body, and the way Sebastian hummed when he was thinking, and the way Christopher reached for her hand whenever he was scared. She had grown accustomed to being needed. That was the dangerous part. On the 8th night, she did not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind shake the shutters. The fire had burned low and the cottage was cold, and she could not stop thinking about the way William had looked at her that morning, like she mattered, like she was not just a woman who mended socks in the corner. Invisible and forgettable, she was still awake when she heard the knock. It was soft, so soft that she almost missed it, but she had been listening for something, and so she heard it. She rose, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, and opened the door. 4 small figures stood on her doorstep, wrapped in cloaks that were too big for them, their faces pink with cold. Gabriel was at the front, his jaw set with the stubbornness she recognized from his father. Behind him, Nathaniel was shivering, and Sebastian was holding Christopher's hand. "Gabriel," she breathed, "what are you doing here?" "It is the middle of the night. We came to see you." "You," Gabriel said. "You did not come to us." Her heart twisted. I have been busy, sweetling. You have been hiding," Gabriel said. He did not say it cruelly. He said it with the simple, devastating honesty of a child. "You are hiding because the women are saying bad things about you. Papa told us. He said we should not listen to them, but we heard them anyway." Claire knelt down so that she was eye level with him. "Gabriel, you said you would not leave," Christopher whispered from behind his brothers. His voice was small and trembling. "You said you would be our mother. Did you lie?" "No," she said, and her voice cracked. No, sweetling. I did not lie. I would never lie about that. Then come back, Gabriel said. Come back with us. Papa said you were the kind of woman who kept her promises. He said you would come back. He said it every night when we asked. He said you would come back because you love us. She could not speak. There were tears in her eyes, and she did not try to stop them. She pulled all 4 of them into her arms, holding them as tightly as she could, feeling their small bodies shake with cold, and something else, something that felt like fear. I will come back, she said. I will come back with you now. I am sorry. I am so sorry I made you worry. They walked back to the castle in the dark, the 4 boys holding onto her skirts and her hands as though they were afraid she might vanish if they let go. The moon was up, silver and cold, and the wind was sharp, but Claire did not feel the cold. She felt only the warmth of the small hands wrapped around hers and the weight of a promise she had made and meant to keep. When they reached the castle, the great hall was dark and empty. William was not there. But there was a fire burning in the hearth and a plate of bread and cheese left on the long table and a note in a heavy, angular hand that made her chest ache. It said, she kept her promise. She did not see William that night, but in the morning, when she went to the sewing room, she found a small bundle on the table wrapped in linen. Inside was a pair of woolen gloves, soft and new, with a note tucked beneath them. The note was in the same heavy hand. It said, the nights are cold. Wear these. She held the gloves in her hands for a long time, running her thumb over the neat stitching. They were not perfect. The seams were slightly uneven, and the thumb was a little too wide, but they were made for her. Someone had measured them for her hands. She put them on, and they fit. When she looked up, William was standing in the doorway of the sewing room. He did not say anything. He just looked at her, his gray eyes soft in the morning light. And then he nodded once and turned and walked away. Claire stood there in the empty room, wearing the gloves he had made her, and she felt something shift inside her chest, something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like she was home. The first snow came to Ashford on a Tuesday, thin and tentative, dusting the village roofs like powdered sugar. Claire stood at the window of the sewing room with her new gloves in her hands, watching the flakes drift past the glass. The castle courtyard was quiet. The guards had pulled their cloaks tighter over their shoulders, and the horses in the stables stamped their hooves against the cold. She had worn the gloves every day since William had left them. She wore them when she walked to the well. She wore them when she sat at her needle. She wore them at night sometimes, when she lay awake in the narrow bed Margaret had given her in the servants' quarters. It was foolish. She knew. A grown woman wearing gloves to bed like a child clutching a blanket. But every time she slipped her hands into the wool, she felt something warm settle in her chest. She had not seen William since the morning he had left the gloves. He had been gone from the castle for 3 days, riding the southern border with his men. The servants whispered that the sheep were not moving well, that the grass had come in thin this year, that the herdsmen were afraid. Claire tried not to listen. She tried not to worry about a man who had never once asked her to worry about him, but she did. It was Margaret who found her standing at the window, still wearing the gloves, her mending basket untouched at her feet. You'll wear a hole in those gloves staring at the snow like that, Margaret said, setting down a tray of bread and cheese on the work table. Sit down. Eat something. You've been thinner than a winter twig since you came back. I'm not hungry, Claire said. Margaret made a noise somewhere between a snort and a sigh. Child, hungry or not, you'll eat. A body can't mend socks on an empty stomach, and it certainly can't mend itself. She pushed the tray toward Claire and fixed her with a look that brooked no argument. Sit. Claire sat. She ate the bread. She ate the cheese. She let Margaret fuss over her as the fire crackled and the snow fell thicker outside the window, and she tried very hard not to think about William out there in the cold, riding along the southern border with his gray eyes and his old scar, and his heart so carefully locked away. The snow did not stop. It fell through Tuesday night and all of Wednesday and into Thursday morning. By the time the 3rd day broke, The village was white to the rooftops, and the roads were thick with slush. Claire woke early to the sound of hooves in the courtyard, the jingle of harnesses, the low murmur of men's voices. She pulled on her dress and her shawl and the woolen gloves, and she hurried down the stairs to the kitchen. Margaret was already there, kneading dough with fierce determination. But her mouth was tight, and her eyes kept darting to the window. "What's happening?" Claire asked. "Why are the horses being saddled?" Margaret's hands did not stop moving. "The southern herds are in trouble. The snow came too early. The herdsmen got the sheep halfway through the pass, and now they're stuck. If they stay up there, they'll freeze." She paused, her voice dropping. "William is going after them." Claire felt the words land like stones in her stomach. "He's going into the pass. In this weather. Someone has to. The sheep are half the trade in this valley. If we lose them, the winter will be hard on everyone." Margaret turned to look at her, and for the first time since Claire had known her, the old cook's eyes were soft. "He'll be gone 3 days. Maybe 4. He'll take his best men and the strongest horses. He's done it before." Claire looked down at her hands, at the gloves he had made her. The seams were slightly uneven. The thumb was a little too wide. She had worn them every day, and they had kept her warm. And now he was going out into the snow without anyone to mend his socks or his cloak or his heart. "I need to see him," she said. Margaret did not argue. She just nodded once and said, "He's in the stable." The stable was a blur of warm breath and straw, and the restless stamping of horses. Claire found William standing beside a tall gray gelding, checking the bridle with quick, efficient movements. He was wearing his heavy traveling cloak, the same one she had mended in the dark that night, and the fur collar was pulled up around his ears. When he saw her, he stopped moving. "Claire," he said. His voice was rough, like he had been shouting orders all morning. "You should be inside. It's cold. You're going to the pass," she said. He did not deny it. He just looked at her. His gray eyes steady and unreadable, and after a moment had said, "The herdsmen are stranded. I won't leave them to freeze." "I know." She took a step closer. The horses shifted in their stalls, and the snow fell steadily beyond the stable doors, and she could see the exhaustion already settling in the lines around his eyes. "William. The boys." Something flickered in his face, a crack in the careful armor. "The boys," he repeated. "They'll stay here. Margaret will watch them. The servants know what to do. They need more than that." Claire's voice was quiet, but it did not waver. "They need someone who will sit with them and tell them that you are coming back. Someone who will hold them when they get scared. Someone who will—" She stopped. Her throat was suddenly tight. "Someone who will be there." William was silent for a long moment. The snow fell. The horses stamped, and then he reached up and he took off his heavy leather glove, and he reached into the inner pocket of his cloak. He pulled out a small folded piece of parchment. "Gabriel gave this to me this morning," he said. "He said it was for you." Claire took the parchment. Her hands were trembling inside the woolen gloves. She unfolded it, and she saw the clumsy, earnest letters of a 6-year-old boy pressed into the paper with all the force he could manage. "Dear Claire, Daddy says you are a woman who keeps promises. We will keep ours too. Please do not go away when he is gone. We will be good. We will listen to Margaret. Please stay. From Gabriel, Nathaniel, Sebastian, and Christopher." She read it twice, 3 times. And then she looked up at William, and she saw that he was watching her with something raw and unguarded in his eyes. "They love you," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "They hardly remember their own mother. But they love you." "I love them too," she said. The words came out before she could stop them, and once they were out, she found she did not want to take them back. "I love them too, William." The stable was quiet. The snow fell, and William looked at her for a long, long moment. And then he said, "Then stay with them, while I'm gone. Stay at the castle. Stay in their rooms. Stay where they can see you and know that you are there." He swallowed. I will come back. I give you my word. But I need to know that they are not alone. Claire looked down at the letter in her hands, at the 4 small signatures scrawled across the bottom. Then she looked up at him. I'll stay, she said. I'll stay as long as you need me to. William nodded. Something in his shoulders seemed to loosen just a little. He reached out, and for a moment she thought he was going to touch her face. But he stopped, his hand hovering in the air between them, and then he dropped it and turned back to the horse. Good, he said gruffly. Then I'll see you in 4 days. He swung up into the saddle. Claire stepped back, clutching the letter to her chest, and she watched him ride out of the stable into the falling snow, his cloak streaming behind him like a banner. The other men followed, a dozen riders in dark cloaks, and they were gone before the snow swallowed their tracks. Claire stood in the stable for a long time, holding Gabriel's letter. That night she moved her things into the boys' chamber. It was a small room, warm and cluttered with toys and wooden swords, and the inevitable collection of smooth stones that the boys had gathered for her. They had set aside a place for her by the fire, a low chair with a cushion, and beside it a basket of mending. Gabriel had put his favorite blanket on the chair. Nathaniel had left a half-eaten apple on the table next to it. Sebastian had drawn the picture of her with a crown on her head and pinned it to the wall. Christopher had crawled into her lap and refused to leave. Claire, Christopher said, his small face pressed against her shoulder. Daddy said you would stay. He said you are a woman who keeps promises. Claire wrapped her arms around him and held him tight. I am, she said. I promise. The boys fell asleep one by one in a tangle of blankets and small limbs. Claire sat in the chair by the fire with Christopher still in her lap, and Gabriel's letter folded carefully in her pocket. The fire crackled. The snow fell against the window, and somewhere in the quiet of the night she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out the letter she had been carrying for years. The letter to her mother. She had written it the winter after her family had fallen. She had written it in the dark, in a cold room in a strange village, and she had never sent it because there was nowhere to send it. Her mother was gone. Her family was gone. Everything she had ever loved had been taken from her, and she had carried the letter ever since like a stone in her pocket. She looked at the envelope. The paper was creased and soft from years of handling. The ink had faded. But the words were still there, the same words she had written in the dark, the same words she had never had the courage to send. She held it over the fire. The flame caught the corner of the envelope. It curled, blackened, and then it caught. And the paper blazed up bright and hot. She watched it burn until there was nothing left but ash, and then she let the ash fall into the fire, and she closed her eyes. She did not need the letter anymore. She had found a new family to write to. The snow had not stopped for 3 days. Claire had lost count of the hours. The castle was quiet in the way that only a place full of waiting can be quiet, every servant moving softer than usual, every door closing with a gentler click. The boys had been brave for 2 days. On the 3rd day, their bravery began to crack. Gabriel had stopped pretending to be a knight. He sat by the window with his chin on his knees, watching the road that disappeared into the white. Nathaniel was trying to teach Sebastian to braid a bit of old rope, but neither of them was paying attention to the knots. Christopher, the littlest, had simply climbed into Claire's lap and refused to move. Papa said 4 days. Christopher whispered against her shoulder. How many days is 4 days? It is 3 days, little one, Claire said softly. One more morning and he will be home. What if the snow eats the road? It won't. Your papa knows every path in this land. He was born here, remember? He knows the way home even with his eyes closed. Christopher considered this. Then he said, Do you know the way home with your eyes closed? The question landed softer than it should have. Claire felt it settle somewhere deep, a small stone dropping into still water. She had no home to know the way to. That was the truth of it. But she could not say that to a frightened 6-year-old. So she said instead, I know the way to the kitchen with my eyes closed. That is the more important skill. It earned her a small giggle. Margaret had been right. A full belly fixed more than hunger. The wind howled around the corner of the tower. Claire pulled the blanket higher over Christopher's shoulders, and then she heard it. A sound that made her heart stop. Hooves. Many hooves, and a voice, rough and tired, calling out to the stable hands. Gabriel was off the window seat before she could say a word. "Papa! Papa's home!" She had never seen 4 small bodies move so fast. They tumbled down the stairs like a waterfall of flannel and wool, and by the time Claire reached the great hall, they were already wrapped around their father's legs. William stood in the doorway with snow melting from his shoulders, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his hands were on his sons' heads, and his eyes were scanning the hall, looking for someone. They found her. She stood at the foot of the stairs, her hands clasped in front of her apron, her hair coming loose from its low bun. She had been sleeping in the boys' room for 3 nights. She had been mending their socks and singing them lullabies, and pretending her heart was not also waiting for the road to clear. "Claire," William said. It was the first time he had said her name. Not the seamstress. Not you. Not nothing at all. Her name. He said it like he had been holding it in his mouth for 3 days, saving it for when he could give it back to her. "Alpha King," she breathed. "You're early. The snow let me pass." He said it simply, as if the storm had simply decided to be kind. But his eyes said something else. His eyes said he had not been willing to wait another day. The boys were still clinging to him, asking 100 questions at once. William let them pull him toward the fire, let Nathaniel tug at his cloak, let Sebastian try to tell him about the braided rope. But even as he let himself be led, his gaze kept finding her, and Claire felt something in her chest crack open just a little, like ice beginning to thaw. She made them all soup. It was the only thing she knew how to make that felt like a homecoming. Thick barley soup with root vegetables and a bay leaf. The kind of soup that filled the whole kitchen with warmth. William ate 2 bowls of it in silence. The boys chattered around him. Claire sat at the far end of the table watching them, and for a moment she let herself imagine that this was hers, that she belonged to this, that she was not a stranger who had simply wandered into the right place at the right time. It was Christopher who broke the spell. He had finished his soup and was sitting on his father's lap, drowsy with warmth. He looked at Claire with the sleepy honesty of a child who has not yet learned to guard his words. "Papa," he said. "Claire sings to us when we can't sleep." William's gray eyes lifted to her. "Does she?" "The song about the little boat. She sings it soft, like the wind." Claire felt her cheeks warm. "It's just an old tune. My mother used to sing it. It was the first time she had mentioned a mother in front of him." She saw the flicker in his eyes, the careful, curious flicker of a man who had noticed. He did not press. He simply said, "I would like to hear it sometime." And then he looked away, and she understood that he was not asking about the song at all. He was asking about the mother, later, when the boys had finally surrendered to sleep. Gabriel curling up with the old scrap of cloak tucked under his chin. Christopher still wrapped around a pillow. Claire found herself standing in front of William's study door. She had never been inside. No one had. The servants spoke of it in whispers, the way they spoke of the locked cradle in the corner. She had almost turned away when the door opened. William stood in the doorway. He had taken off his cloak, but he still wore the same tired, raw look he had worn when he came in from the snow. "You're still awake," he said. "I was going to check on the boys. They're asleep. I just looked in on them." He paused. Then he said, "Come in. There's something I should show you." The study was warm, lit by a single fire. Books lined the walls, and there was a heavy desk with papers scattered across it. Maps, ledgers, the business of running a land. But Claire's eyes were drawn to the corner, to the shape that stood there in the shadows. It was a cradle, old, carved from dark wood, with a faded blanket folded at the bottom. She had heard about it, but seeing it was different. It felt like walking into a room and finding a grave. "That was theirs," William said quietly. "All 4 of them slept in it. Eleanor insisted on it. Even after I said we'd need a bigger one. She said they'd fit fine." And she was right. They always did. He moved toward it, and Claire watched him. His hand hovered over the cradle, not quite touching it. I haven't opened it since she died. I couldn't. But I think... He stopped. His voice was rough. I think it's time. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among folded baby blankets, was a letter. The envelope was yellowed, the wax seal broken. William picked it up with hands that trembled slightly, and he held it for a long moment before he opened it. She wrote it the last night, he said, when she knew she wouldn't see the morning. She made me promise not to read it until I was ready, until I found someone worth showing it to. He read it aloud, his voice low and unsteady. My William, if you're reading this, then the winter has passed and you are still here, and the boys are growing. I want you to know that I am not afraid. I have loved enough for 2 lifetimes, and I have been loved the same. Do not grieve me too long. Do not let the castle become a tomb. Find someone who will mend their socks. Find someone who will sing them lullabies and braid their hair and argue with the cook about how much sugar is too much sugar. Find someone who will love them the way I loved them, the way I loved you. When you find her, tell her this: I am grateful. I am grateful that she found you, and I am grateful that my boys will not grow up without a mother's voice. William's voice broke on the last words. He folded the letter carefully, precisely, and set it back in the cradle. Claire stood very still. The words had settled into her chest like warm stones, and she could not speak. She was very wise. She managed at last. She was. William looked at her, and there was something raw in his gray eyes. Something she had never seen there before. Claire, I have to ask you something. And you don't have to answer tonight. You don't have to answer at all if you don't want to. Ask me, she whispered. You have no family here. No one to go to. I've watched you mend our clothes and sing to my sons and make soup for a man you barely know. And He stopped. He ran a hand through his hair, and for a moment he looked less like an alpha king and more like a man who had been alone for a very long time. I want to know where you came from, who you are. Not because I have any right to ask, because I want to know the woman who has been mothering my children. She felt it then. The crack in her own armor, the sealed place she had carried for years, the stone in her pocket that had been heavier than the letter she had burned. She told him. She told him about the old noble house that had fallen when she was 17, the debts, the betrayal, the family scattered like leaves in a storm. She told him about the aunt who had taken her in and then turned her out when the money ran out. She told him about the years of drifting, of sewing for strangers, of never staying long enough to call any place home. She told him about the night she had arrived in Ashford, cold and hungry, with nothing but a bundle of needles and a single change of clothes. I am nobody, she finished. I am a seamstress with no family and no name of my own worth mentioning. My father was a traitor to the crown, or so they said. I don't even know if it was true. I only know that I have been running from that name my whole life, and I am tired of running. William was silent for a long moment. Then he said, What was your father's name? She hesitated. Aldrich of the Vale. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Aldrich of the Vale, he repeated. I knew that name. My father spoke of him once. He said he was a good man who made a bad enemy. Claire stared at him. Your father knew my father? He knew of him. It was enough to know he wasn't what the rumors made him. William's voice was quiet, certain. The rumors were wrong about him. Claire, and they are wrong about you. The words broke something in her chest. She felt the tears come, sudden and hot, and she could not stop them. I have been carrying that shame for so long, she whispered. I thought if anyone knew they would turn me out like the rest. William took a step toward her, then another. He stopped a hand's breadth away, and he reached up slowly, carefully, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Claire, he said, I have been carrying my own shame for 3 years. I blamed myself for Eleanor's death for so long, that I forgot how to let myself love anything again. I locked that cradle because I couldn't bear to look at it. I stopped singing because every song reminded me of her. And then my sons found you, and you sang to them, and you mended their socks, and you made soup for a man you barely knew. And his voice caught. He looked away, and she saw his jaw tighten. I don't want to be cold anymore, he said. I'm so tired of being cold. She reached up and took his hand. It was warm and rough and huge around hers, and it trembled slightly. Then don't be, she said softly. You don't have to be cold with me. They stood there in the firelight, hands clasped, two people who had carried their stones for too long. And then, from somewhere in the castle, a small voice called out, "Claire!" It was Christopher. William's hand tightened around hers, and he smiled. A real smile, the first she had ever seen on his face. They need you, he said. They need us, she corrected. They walked back to the nursery together. Christopher was sitting up in bed, his cheeks flushed, clutching the old scrap of cloak. I had a dream, he said sleepily. I dreamed you were my real mother. Claire sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled the blanket up to his chin. I don't have to pretend, little one, she said softly. I am very happy to be your mother. Behind her, William stood in the doorway. She felt his eyes on her. Warm and steady, and for the first time in her life, Claire did not feel like a stranger in a strange land. She belonged here. She was home. The snow melted slowly that year, as if the land itself was reluctant to let go of winter. But spring came at last, the way it always does, not with a grand announcement, but with small, persistent signs, a patch of green where the path had been white, the sound of water running beneath the ice, the first pale crocus pushing through the frozen earth outside Claire's little mill house. She found it on a Tuesday morning, that first flower. She had come back to fetch the last of her things, a few books, her sewing basket, the dried flowers pressed between their pages. The mill house had been her refuge for nearly a year, and now it felt strange to stand in its single room and know she would not be returning. It's not going anywhere, she told the crocus, half laughing at herself. You don't need me to watch you bloom. But she knelt anyway, tracing the fragile petals with one finger. Somewhere behind her she heard the sound of boots on the path. Heavy, steady, familiar. You're talking to flowers now, William said. She looked up. He stood at the edge of the path, his deep gray cloak draped over his shoulders, his hair catching the morning light. He was holding a small wooden box under one arm, and he looked. She thought, almost nervous. I talk to a lot of things, she said. The chickens, the bread when it's rising, the boys when they'll sit still long enough. They never sit still long enough. No, she agreed, standing and brushing the dirt from her knees. They don't. It's one of their best qualities. He smiled, that real smile she had seen only a handful of times, the one that reached his gray eyes and softened the hard lines of his face. He held out the box. What's this? She asked. Open it. She did. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a key, an old iron key, heavy and warm, with a worn wooden handle. What does it open? She asked. The castle, he said. The pantry, the linen closet, the nursery, the garden gate, the front door. He paused. All the doors. Claire, I want you to have a key to all of them. She turned the key over in her hands. It was not a grand gesture, not a crown or a ring or a proclamation, but it was a key to his home, to his children, to his life. It was, she thought, the most precious thing anyone had ever given her. I don't know what to say, she said. You don't have to say anything. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the wood smoke on his cloak. Just keep it. Use it. Come and go as you please. This is your home now. Claire, if you want it to be. She looked up at him. This man who had been called cold and heartless by half the territory, who had carried his grief like a suit of armor for 3 years. And she saw what no one else had ever bothered to see. A man who was simply afraid. Afraid to hope, afraid to love, afraid to lose again. "I want it to be," she said. He let out a breath, as if he had been holding it for a long time. He did not kiss her. Not yet. Not here. Not like this. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, and she felt his fingers close around hers, warm and sure. "Then come home," he said. The castle had changed. That was the first thing she noticed as they walked through the main gate. Not the stone walls or the towers. Those were the same as they had always been. But there were flowers in the window boxes now, and the courtyard had been swept, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen. Margaret was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, a scowl on her face that didn't quite hide the gleam in her eye. "About time," she said. "I've been feeding those 4 boys for 3 years, and they still can't tell a spoon from a ladle. You've got your work cut out for you. Good morning to you, too." "Margaret," Claire said. "It is a good morning." The cook's voice softened. "It's a good morning indeed." The boys found her before she had even reached the great hall. They came tearing down the corridor like a small herd of particularly enthusiastic goats. 4 pairs of bare feet slapping against the stone. 4 voices shouting her name. "Claire! Claire! You're back! Did you bring the stones? Did you bring the flour? Is the mill house empty now? Are you staying? Are you staying forever?" She knelt down and they collided with her all at once. A tangle of arms and freckled faces and unstoppable chatter, one at a time. She laughed. "I can't understand you when you all talk at once." Gabriel, the eldest, pulled back and looked at her with those serious gray eyes so like his father's. "Are you staying?" he asked. "For real? Not just for a visit, for real," she said. "Forever and ever." He considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Satisfied?" "Good," he said. "Because we decided we don't want to pretend anymore." "No?" she asked. "No." Nathaniel stepped forward, clutching something behind his back. "We talked about it, all of us, and we decided that pretending is silly, because you're not a pretend mother. You're a real one." He held out his hands. In them was a wilted crown of daisies, clumsily woven with several stems poking out at odd angles. "We made it for you," Sebastian said. "It's a crown, because you're the best mother in the whole world." "The whole entire world," Christopher added. Claire felt her eyes sting. She took the crown carefully, as if it were made of gold, and set it on her head. "It's beautiful," she said. "The most beautiful crown I've ever worn." Christopher climbed into her lap and wrapped his arms around her neck. "Now you don't have to pretend," he whispered. "Now you're just our mother. For real." Behind her, she heard William clear his throat. When she looked up, he was standing in the doorway of the great hall, and his eyes were bright. "They practiced that speech all morning," he said. Sebastian kept forgetting the whole entire world part. "It's the best part," Sebastian protested. "It is," Claire said. "It's the best part, that evening." After the boys had been bathed and fed and tucked into bed, Claire found herself in the garden. It was a small walled garden behind the castle, overgrown and neglected. But she could see its bones, the shapes of old rose beds, the outlines of paths. A stone bench half hidden by weeds. She was holding a small clay pot. In it were the ashes of the letter she had burned months ago, the letter she had written to her mother but never sent. William found her there, as he always seemed to know where to find her. "The boys said you were in the garden," he said. "They wanted to come with you, but I told them you needed a moment." "I do," she said. "I wanted to do this alone, but I'm glad you're here." She knelt down and dug a small hole in the soft earth. She poured the ashes into it, then covered them gently. "What was it?" he asked. "A letter," she said. "To my mother. I wrote it years ago after I was sent away. I never had the courage to send it, and then it was too late." She paused. "I burned it last winter before you left for the passes. I thought I was done with it. but I've been carrying the ashes around ever since, and I realized I don't want to carry them anymore." "What did it say?" he asked quietly. "It said I was sorry. It said I wished I had been braver. It said I hoped she knew I loved her even if I never got to say it out loud." She looked up at him, and her eyes were wet. "It said I was afraid I would never belong anywhere again." He was silent for a long moment. Then he knelt down beside her, and together they covered the ashes with earth. "You belong here," he said. "You belong with us. With me. And wherever you go, you will carry that with you. Not the ashes. Not the fear. Just us." She nodded, unable to speak. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small paper sack, the kind Margaret used for seeds. "What's that?" she asked. "A present," he said. "For the garden. For you." She opened it. Inside were white rose seeds, tiny, unremarkable, full of promise. "White roses," she said. "Eleanor loved white roses," he said. "She used to say they were the purest thing in the world because they didn't need to be loud to be beautiful." He paused. "I think you're like that too." Claire looked at the seeds, then at the man beside her. This quiet, wounded, fiercely loving man who had learned slowly to open his heart again. "Where should we plant them?" she asked. He pointed to a spot near the stone bench where the afternoon sun would reach. "There, where you can see them when you sit in the evening." They planted the seeds together, side by side, their hands brushing in the dark earth. When they were done, William sat back on his heels and wiped his hands on his cloak. "They'll take a while to grow," he said. "Roses are patient." "So am I," she said. "I've been patient my whole life. I can be patient for a rose." It was late by the time they went back inside. The castle was quiet, the boys asleep, the servants retired for the night. Claire sat down in the chair by the nursery fire with her sewing basket, the way she had done 100 times before. She was mending socks. It was, she thought, the most fitting way to end the day. The same task she had been doing when the boys had first found her all those months ago in the cold corner of the laundry room. The door opened softly. William came in, his boots silent on the stone, and sat down in the chair across from her. He had something in his hands, a folded length of wool, gray-blue, the same color as his cloak. "What are you working on?" she asked. He held it out. "I made this for you," he said. "Last winter before I left. I didn't know if I would have the courage to give it to you when I came back." She unfolded it. It was a pair of gloves, knitted by hand, the stitches slightly uneven but careful. She turned them over and her breath caught in her throat. The stitches were exactly the same as the ones on the inside of his cloak, the ones she had repaired that winter night, the ones she had never told anyone about. "You noticed," she said. "I noticed," he said. "You thought I wouldn't. But I noticed the night you fixed my cloak, and I noticed the way you worked in the lamplight without asking for anything in return, and I thought maybe I could learn to be like that, to give without waiting to be asked." She looked at him, this man who had been called cold and heartless, who had locked away his grief and his love for 3 years, and she saw him clearly, not as the Alpha King, not as the feared Lord of Ashford, but as William. "Just William. They're beautiful," she said. "They're the most beautiful gloves I've ever had." "Try them on," he said. She did. They were a little too big, but they were warm, and she could feel the care in every stitch. "They're perfect," she said. He smiled that real, rare smile. "I'll make you another pair," he said. "Better ones. I've been practicing." "Practice on socks first," she said. "The boys go through them like water." He laughed. It was a sound she had heard only a few times, but each time it made her heart feel strangely light. "I'll try," he said, "but I make no promises. My talents are limited. Your talents are considerable," she said. "You just don't let people see them." He was quiet for a moment, watching her hands move with the needle and thread. The fire crackled. The castle slept. Somewhere above them, a child stirred in his sleep and then settled again. "Claire," he said. "I I never thought I would sit like this again, he said. By a fire with someone I trust. I thought that part of my life was over when Eleanor died. I thought I would be alone for the rest of my days, and I had accepted it. I had made peace with it. And now, he looked at her, and his gray eyes were soft in the firelight. And now I think I was wrong, he said. I think I was very wrong. She set down her sewing and reached across the space between them. He took her hand, and she felt his fingers close around hers, warm and steady, like they belonged there. I was wrong too, she said. I thought I would never belong anywhere. I thought I was doomed to be a stranger in every place I went. She smiled. But then 4 small boys found me in a laundry room and asked me to be their mother. And a very serious man with a very old wound taught me that it's never too late to let someone in. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. A gesture so tender, so unexpectedly gentle, that she felt tears prick her eyes again. I love you, he said. I don't know how to say it any better than that. I've never been good with words. But I love you, Claire. I love the way you mend things. I love the way you sing to the boys when they can't sleep. I love the way you talk to flowers and argue with Margaret about sugar and put daisy crowns on your head like they're made of gold. They are made of gold, she said, her voice trembling. They were made by your sons. Then I love that too, he said. I love everything you touch, Claire. I love the life you've brought into this house. I love the way you've made it a home again. She leaned forward and kissed him, softly, gently. A kiss that tasted like wood smoke and spring rain, and the promise of 100 more mornings by the fire. When she pulled back, his hand was still holding hers. I love you too, she said. I love you. William of House Ashford, I love your serious eyes and your stubborn heart, and the way you practice braiding your son's hair in secret because you want to be good at it. He laughed, startled. How did you know about that? The boys told me, she said. They think it's very funny. They also think you're the best father in the whole entire world. And they're right. He ducked his head, embarrassed, and she saw the faint flush on his cheeks. I'm trying, he said. I'm not always good at it. You're good at it, she said. You're very good at it. And I'm going to be here to help you every day, for as long as you want me. For as long as I want you, he repeated. That's a very long time. Claire, I should warn you. Good, she said. I'm not going anywhere. They sat by the fire for a long time after that, not talking much, just being together. Claire finished the sock she was mending and set it aside. William reached into her sewing basket and picked up another one, a small one of the boys' socks with a hole in the heel. What are you doing? She asked. Learning, he said. You said I should practice on socks. He fumbled with the needle, his large hands clumsy with the delicate work. Claire watched, biting back a smile, as he managed to prick his finger twice and tangle the thread once. Here, she said, leaning over, like this. You have to push the needle through from the other side. She guided his hands, showing him the rhythm of it, the small, precise movements that had become second nature to her. He was a quick learner for a man who had never held a needle in his life. Not bad, she said. For a king. Not bad, he agreed. For a man who used to be alone. He set down the sock, still half mended, and reached for his cloak. He unfolded it and draped it over her shoulders, tucking it around her like a blanket. You're cold, he said. I wasn't, she said. But thank you. You are, he said. You always are. You run cold. Claire, you always have. She pulled the cloak tighter around her shoulders. It smelled like him, like wood smoke and leather and the faint, clean scent of the winter wind. You'll stay? She asked. I'll stay, he said. I'll stay as long as you want me. Then stay forever, she said. I want you forever. He picked up their sock again, and she picked up another one, and they worked side by side in the firelight, the Alpha King of Ashford and the woman who had taught him how to mend things, stitching socks together as the night deepened and the stars rose over the castle walls. Above them in the nursery, Gabriel opened one sleepy eye and poked Nathaniel. "She's still here," he whispered. "I told you," Nathaniel murmured. "I told you she would stay. She's not even pretending anymore," Sebastian added, his voice thick with sleep. "She's just our mother now. And she's going to be our mother forever and ever," Christopher said, clutching his scrap of old cloak. "Because we asked her, and she said yes." They were all smiling as they drifted back to sleep. 4 small boys with white rose seeds in their hearts and the sound of their father's quiet laugh drifting up from the fire below. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the melting snow, there was a new crown of daisies on the kitchen table and a pair of gloves folded neatly beside it and a note in a child's handwriting that read, "For our real mother, from your 4 favorite knights." Claire picked up the note and read it twice, and then she folded it carefully and put it in her pocket next to the iron key that opened all the doors in Ashford Castle. And she smiled, because she knew, finally, truly, completely, that she was home. She thought she was just mending clothes, but she ended up stitching a broken family back together. Sometimes true love doesn't start with a crown. It starts with a whispered promise to 4 little boys in the dark.